Week 20 Overview China's Revolution. This week takes us to China, where we focus on two Chinese leaders, Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek, who struggled, sometimes as allies, sometimes as opponents, for control of China for over 30 years. Your students will review what they've learned about China in previous years. We cover China several times in Tapestry, from the first civilizations in Year 1 to Marco Polo's visit in Year 2 to the Opium Wars in Year 3. By Year 4, the ancient Chinese Empire was on its last legs. After decades of debilitating interactions with Western nations, the Qing dynasty was tottering. Chinese intellectuals wanted to reinvigorate their ancient land before Western conquerors took it from them. In about 1910, the New Youth movement of radical intellectuals began to consider the teaching of Western thinkers, especially anarchists and socialists. The leaders among these young radicals came to the conclusion that Chinese society was stagnant and ought to be leveled and remade entirely. While they debated and wrote thoughtful articles, the Qing dynasty did fall, and a nationalist party attempted to set up a Chinese republic under a leader named Sun Yat-sen. Sun called for a new China based on three main principles: nationalism, democracy, and socialism. The infant republic was taken over by a strong man, however, who ousted Sun and tried to rule as a new emperor. Powerful local leaders opposed him, and by 1915 China was ruled by provincial warlords who maintained private armies, warred with each other, and severely oppressed the peasantry with taxes and hard labor. At the same time, Sun Yat-sen's Nationalist Party became active again. Sun died in 1925, and his Moscow-trained lieutenant, Chiang Kai-shek, overcame all rivals for leadership of the Nationalists. Mao Zedong was born in 1893 and grew up in this difficult time. His parents were well-to-do peasants who helped him get an advanced Western education. He read many Western thinkers and avidly followed the New Youth movement. He was just 16 when he joined the Revolutionary Army that toppled the Qing dynasty. He served for 6 months without ever seeing a battle. That revolution was a disappointment, but Mao continued to be interested in radical ideas. World War I brought fresh turmoil around the world. Japan threatened to invade China. The weak Chinese government ultimately turned to Europe for help and/or made secret deals with Japan. When this news leaked, massive protests erupted across China. It was the first time in modern Chinese history that the people had risen up in widespread nationalism. Mao was forming his own philosophy of life in this period. In his most extreme expressions in his younger years, he called his view true egoism, by which he meant that the self is the center of all things and all thought. Self-interest is primary for all persons. He further declared, "Some say that we must believe that moral law comes from the command of God. This is a slavish mentality. Why should you obey God rather than obey yourself? You are God. Is there any other God besides yourself?" Such thoughts led him away from traditional Chinese ideas into radical alternatives. Russia, China's neighbor and Japan's enemy, experienced a communist revolution. Chinese intellectuals admired the Russian revolutionaries without any real understanding of their Marxist ideology. In the summer of 1919, Mao first published his political views in his Manifesto, Declaration of Views. With the Russian Revolution of 1917 as his model, he wrote that China could experience the same kind of revolution, in that they could overthrow the aristocrats and drive out the rich. He believed that China must emulate the Russians and that in doing so they could come to their full glory as a nation. In 1920, Mao decided to become a communist. He became a founding member of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, 1921. In those days, Chinese communists had almost no access to any actual Marxist writings. According to Marx, communism was supposed to arise by the iron laws of dialectical materialism when the day laborers of an advanced industrial economy pushed their capitalist masters to the wall. China's feudal agricultural economy was the last place on earth that Karl Marx would have predicted a communist revolution, so nobody bothered to translate Marx's major writings into Chinese. That wasn't a problem for Mao, though. He was not so much a Marxist as a revolutionary. Mao and many of his peers believed that China needed a total cultural change, which must begin with the government. As the Chinese Communist Party grew, Russia took an interest in the new movement. Stalin sent Soviets to advise the CCP. Unfortunately for Mao and his fellow revolutionaries, Stalin had no interest in immediately promoting communism in China. Stalin, who had studied Marx, thought China would have to go through a capitalist phase before it could ever reach communism. Stalin told the CCP to team up with Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists, who wanted to throw out the foreign devils and build up Chinese capitalism. The Chinese communists decided to follow Stalin's advice. Mao became a member of the Communist Central Executive Committee and served on the Nationalist Executive Committee at the same time. Mao started off organizing factory workers in the cities, but local warlords felt threatened and snuffed out his infant workers' association in a single week. Mao grew disillusioned. There were too few of these proletarians to make any real difference in a land as vast as China. Mao left the cities for his home province of Hunan, where he started working with peasants. He was surprised and delighted to discover that the peasants were already forming their own spontaneous associations, and, with proper training, were able to win. In his lengthy Hunan report, Mao analyzed and extolled the spontaneous peasant uprisings and recommended that the communists harness the revolutionary energy of the peasantry. His focus on revolutionizing the peasants was a serious departure from Marxism. Mao's heresy had several key components. First, he rejected the Marxist assumption that the triumph of capitalism definitively established the dominance of the city over the countryside in the making of modern history. Mao's distrust of cities would eventually grow into a general distrust of intellectuals and a perception of cities as dens of moral corruption and centers of political reaction. Mao also rejected the central Marxist belief that modern history revolved around two urban classes into which capitalism was progressively dividing society, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Mao came to believe that Chinese peasants could be more revolutionary than the urban factory workers. Mao also departed from Lenin's reinterpretation of Marx, which stated that revolutions must be channeled and led by highly centralized and tightly knit party organizations presided over by a dedicated elite of professional revolutionaries. As Mao put it, all revolutionary parties and all revolutionary comrades will stand before the peasants to be tested, to be accepted or rejected as they decide. Finally, Mao openly challenged the authority of the Comintern, headquartered in Stalin's Moscow. While most CCP leaders carried out Communist international policy, although often with reluctance, Mao dissented. He passionately defended his peasants even when Stalin accused them of excesses and ordered the Chinese Communist Party to keep them in check. While Mao was forming his new ideas concerning revolutionary peasants, Chiang Kai-shek was getting ready to break with the Chinese Communist Party. Chiang was happy to have the CCP help him fight the warlords and imperialists, but he had no intention of sharing power. He turned on the communists in 1927, and civil war erupted between the rival groups. Mao was forced to flee for his life into the remote and desolate mountains, where he organized a guerrilla fighting force that became known as the Red Army. Peasants, bandits, and breakaway nationalist soldiers joined him. From 1930 to 1933, Mao's forces and territory expanded. Then the nationalists surrounded his strongholds and laid siege to him for a year. In 1934, Mao's army was forced to retreat and began an epic trek north, a long march of 6,000 miles. Between 1 and 200,000 soldiers battled north across some of China's most difficult and dangerous terrain for almost a year. Only 7,000 or 8,000 survived the long march. Mao fought and traveled side by side with his troops, but he was never wounded once. The peasants began to believe that he was supernaturally protected. They saw him as a savior and a prophet. Once Mao established a new stronghold in the north of China, he called for an end to the civil war so that nationalists and communists could unite against the Japanese invaders, who had taken large chunks of China. In 1937, the two sides formed a truce, which lasted until the Japanese were defeated. Interestingly, the Soviet Union and the United States both supported the nationalists against the Chinese communists throughout this period. Stalin saw Mao as a heretic, a loose cannon who either didn't understand or didn't care about orthodox Marxism. The nationalists had 10 times more power than the communists in theory, but corruption and poor leadership on the nationalist side allowed Mao's well-led peasant armies to rout them. Chiang Kai-shek and his forces fled for the island of Taiwan, which China had recently taken from Japan at the end of World War II. Roughly 2 million Chinese refugees established the Republic of China there, which exists to this day. China's fall to communism was a huge shock to the world. It was then, and still is, the most populous country in the world. Some people feared, and others hoped, that Marxism must inevitably sweep the world, but those who thought so didn't understand what Marx taught. Russia wasn't the place Marx expected a revolution because it wasn't industrialized. And China was even less industrialized than Russia had been when Lenin's Bolsheviks took control in 1917. Interestingly, though both Lenin and Mao were avowed communists, neither one conducted revolutions that fulfilled the prophecies or bore out the socioeconomic theories of Marx.